Hi there, my name is Ben from Circle Canoe Games. I'm a game designer, and this video is part of a series that is going to review my own games. And this is not going to be a review in the traditional sense of, should you play this game, should you buy it? This is more of a design review of looking at what was my inspiration, what were the internal rules or logic I followed, how did I decide on the visual design as well as the gameplay design, and am I happy with the results or would I change things now looking back? So the first game we're going to look at is the first game I ever finished. And it is both my favorite game as well as my least favorite game. And through this review process, we'll get into why that is. So this first game is called Park Trails. So let me go ahead and give you the lightning speed overview of this game just so you can kind of understand how it works. You're going to be getting cards that have information sort of like this. There is the decade that the national park was in, as well as the difficulty of the trail, and some points on there. That's really the game information. There's also the design of the actual trail map, and other information that's on there in terms of the actual year that park was created and things like that. But really, for the purpose of the game, we have 52 cards and they all have unique trails on them as well as the decade in which that park was built. And we're gonna be using that to make the game. So in this game, each player is dealt 10 cards face down in a row. And throughout the game, they are trying to flip over cards and arrange them from most recently completed parks to the oldest parks. And in that process, there's also difficulty of trails and things like that that work into it. But essentially, this is a sequencing game. That's the overview. So you're gonna be taking cards from the center pile. Other players are gonna be taking cards, trying to take cards from other players, possibly. And the first one to complete their line of cards from least to greatest decade is the winner. Okay, so I want to talk about the design inspiration. Where did this come from? Well, as a family, we've always gone to national parks, a lot of great pastime there, and so I wanted to make a game that was very specific, meaning it wasn't just generally about the national parks or even just about the names of the parks themselves, but got into actual trails, some of which I've actually hiked, and into the difficulty level, the actual topography maps. I like the real thing, and so that was sort of my inspiration for the aesthetic, and then wanting to build a game around how could that function in terms of something that you can play. And so I toyed around with lots of ideas of stringing trails together and things like that. But what I came up with was this idea of that there were parks that were opened in different decades, and so the idea of the game was to sequence parks according to those decades that they opened. And this might ring some bells with you in terms of gameplay, and it's very similar to Rack-O, right? The old school game of Rack-O where you're ordering cards and you're trying to determine if I leave a space with only 3 cards in between, am I gonna be able to get one of those 3 cards? There is definitely a lot of similarity between this game and that in terms of that element. However, this also adds in an element of memory, that you're able to kind of peek at cards when they're face down. You're able to sort of make a plan, but it's hidden information from yourself or from other players. And so, you're not dealing with perfect information the way that you are in Rack-O. What game design choices did I have to make? Well, really, I wanted it to be a very quick game, okay? I didn't want this to be something that's drawn out, and I'm picturing this as a game that is, it'll be taken on vacation when you play it, when you're actually camping or staying in a hotel at a national park, so pretty light family weight and moves along quickly. And so those are sort of the things I wanted it to do. In terms of the graphic design choices, what was really, really important to me was that the cards had actual maps on them, right? It wasn't just some generic topography stand-in, but it was actually, real maps that would be used for these trails. And so I went in, I was able to find all these, open source maps with the actual topography on them. I actually traced out where the trails went on each of these. So I spent probably for this game way too much time getting that very precise in terms of where these trails actually were on these topography maps. It's really cool, but it's also, that doesn't really play into gameplay at all, so it's really just an aesthetic thing. And one other thing, a design choice I made, which it's small enough that you might not even be able to see, but I'll see if I can get this. All right, so you can see at the corners right here, I have the standard playing card. This was a 2 of clubs. And so these cards could get used just as a standard deck of cards. And early on, I made the decision that, well, if I'm using a standard number of decks, that I should have this be functional as just a regular set of playing cards. To me, I felt like that added value and made it so this game was multi-purpose, right? You can play Park Trails or you can just play any card game. And I really like that idea, and I still try to do that anytime I have a card game that uses a standard deck of cards. But where I failed in that and what I would change is I just made those elements too small, right? They're near the corner, so if you were actually trying to play a game of, you know, any game, poker, solitaire, it's just small enough that it's not really functional, right? The corners are so small, you'd have to hold your hand like right in front of your face to be able to see it clearly. And picturing this getting used, you know, around the campfire to play some sort of a game where it's darker. So that's just a design mistake that going back, I would just make those elements larger. I certainly have space on the card that I could do that. That's something that hopefully I've learned and implemented with future games. So what do I like about this game? What do I, looking back now, not like as much? Well, what I like, ultimately, my favorite part of this are 2 things. One, this was the first game that I actually finished. Up to that point, I had been dabbling in a few games that, you know, I had developed for quite a while and I was just never able to finish. I didn't know what to do to get a completed game. And so I never got it through the, like a final design phase where I could print it out from the game crafter or I could just hand it to other people and they would be able to play it from the rules alone. And so to me, that was one of the huge sort of accomplishments of this game for me, was that I actually finished it. Like it's a playable game the way it is. And the other thing I really liked is the aesthetic. I was able to make the game look the way that I wanted it to. So those to me are the 2 highlights of this game for me personally. What I'm not as big a fan of, well, I don't think, even with the changes I made with the adding of the memory, I don't think it's far enough removed from the original game of Rack-O. Like, it's still just a sequencing game. And through playtesting this, you know, I tried adding in more sort of interactive elements between players, and I was just never able to make it click in a way that made sense. It always felt like when you were taking an action on another player, it really wasn't helping you enough to justify taking that action, because it's sort of a race of a game. So you focusing on someone else's stack of cards meant that you weren't focusing on your own. And you know, it just never really clicked completely. And so as a result, it ended up being kept a simpler game, but a game that is still basically, you know, a reskin with a slight twist of Rack-O. And so it's not my favorite game of mine to play, for sure. And so to do it differently, I would probably just spend more time in development of trying to find, like, what is that way that I can have players interact more meaningfully and have that player interaction be more central to the game as opposed to just like an optional action that players can do. Oh, and one more thing that I would just say I would do differently the next time is, with really most of my early games, I didn't go through the process of making a booklet for the rules. I did all my rules on just paper that then got folded, and it gets printed by the game crafter. It's very nice quality, but it's a little cumbersome. The page is huge compared to the size of the cards. It doesn't feel very well finished. And so that's one thing I would change going back, is actually take the time to make a rule booklet as opposed to just this folded down piece of paper. Maybe that's just a personal pet peeve of mine, I'm not sure. So in conclusion, right, what is my overall impression of this game, Park Trails? How do I really feel about it? Well, I think I am extremely proud to have made it. I love the design, and I love sort of what this symbolizes in my development as a game maker. But as far as games of my own that I would like to play, this ranks pretty low to the bottom of the list, just because of that lack of that player interaction. And so for that reason, it's in the same category for me as Rack-O. It has a place on a game table, but it's certainly not my favorite game. So thanks so much for joining me for this review of Park Trails. Again, this is not meant to say, should you play it, should you buy it, anything like this. This is more of an internal review of my design process and what I've learned. Looking back, when I see my games, what do I see about the decisions I've made, and how can I improve as a game designer moving forward? And if you're a game designer, what lessons have you learned, similar lessons probably, that can help propel your future games forward? So thanks so much for joining me. I hope you'll join me for the next video where I review another one of my previous games.